Hey guys, in this video I'm going to introduce and explain my course on music theory. Music theory sometimes has kind of a bad reputation. Some people feel like it's rather boring or maybe just too difficult to bother with. And a lot of music students feel that the way they've been taught music theory in a classroom setting is very strict and stagnant and not particularly relevant. And that happens when all the information is presented and the emphasis is on identifying, categorizing, memorizing, and reproducing the information for a written test, but not enough emphasis is placed on how to actually put this information into practice in an actual musical performance. Now, I find memorizing random strings of information to be extremely fun, but I totally understand how for some people that can sort of turn into a chore. So, the goal of this course is to completely banish that boring reputation and to reframe and change the way you see music theory and the way you feel about it and the way that you use it. So goal number one is to share my love of music theory with you and hopefully show you that music theory can be incredibly fascinating. And goal number two is to give you the tools that you need to actually apply music theory in your own musical performance. So how are we going to actually do this in the course? Every month, we are going to listen to and analyze a piece of music. These selections are going to be from throughout history and across several different styles and genres. So we're going to have some early music selections. We're going to look at pieces from the Baroque and Classical periods, as well as the Romantic and later. We're also going to take a look at jazz, other popular music of the 20th century, including rock, soul, R&B, things like that. We're going to look at folk and traditional music, so Irish melodies, maybe some spirituals, some bluegrass. And to make it even broader, I'm actually going to have a couple of guest speakers to come on and talk about some totally non-Western harmony. So as we listen to each piece of music, we're really going to focus on enjoying the piece and finding those points in the piece that really elicit a positive reaction and sort of zoom in at those points and try to figure out what exactly is going on. So the emphasis is not going to be on cataloging every single kind of scale or every single kind of chord. And I'm not going to make you learn figured bass or rap you on the knuckles when you're doing your voice leading exercises incorrectly. Now, don't get me wrong, we will certainly touch on all of those things because they're very important. But the emphasis is going to be on listening, understanding, appreciating these pieces of music, and identifying what are the elements that make us feel feelings. Because I think that is where music theory gets really interesting. Now, as we go from piece to piece and jump from one century to the next and from one genre to the other, I'm going to try to address a couple of themes that really pervade throughout all of these selections. The first one is vertical versus horizontal, and that one's really fascinating because in different cultures and in different styles of music, those two approaches are prioritized differently. Sometimes they're mixed together, sometimes the focus is entirely on one or the other. Another theme that I'm going to trace is the influence of historical events, philosophical ideas, and religious ideas on the development of music theory. Speaking of which, make sure you also check out my live discussion room that's going to happen every month about music history. Another theme I'm going to emphasize is the fact that music theory is typically retrospective, which means that it's usually analysis done after the fact of pieces that were composed freely. So composers typically did whatever they wanted. They might follow the guidelines of a particular style in order to fit into that style, but composers were breaking rules all the time. And then after the fact, things that they did that were considered rule breaking might actually become the very rules of the next generation of composers. Music theory is not really a set of rules, but it's actually just a way to understand what musicians and composers have already done. The last theme I'm going to touch on is how sounds become standardized and how tastes evolve throughout history. So, an interesting thing to note here, there is no objective hierarchy of sounds. Some intervals do occur naturally in the harmonic series, but that doesn't necessarily make them better, and also, they're not always the intervals that you think. Some of the sounds that we consider to be very sweet, very harmonious, very common, they're actually not necessarily the basic intervals of that natural harmonic series. So there's really no evidence to believe that any one interval or scale or tuning strategy or harmonic approach or kind of music theory is superior to any other. And so by and large, whether or not we find a particular sound or interval or type of chord or musical phrase pleasing is mostly due to conditioning. But the cool thing is, once we recognize that this conditioning has in fact happened within any one culture or any one style, we can learn about it and learn the hierarchy of sounds within that admittedly subjective framework. And so as a composer or a creator of music, once you understand the framework that you're working within, you can then make creative choices deliberately to either stay totally in the box and make something that's traditionally very pleasing, that has a very high likelihood that a lot of people will find it harmonious, or to maybe play around at the edges a little bit and challenge people's perception of what is pleasing, or to just jump completely outside the box and do something that no one expects. And I think that we as humans, we really appreciate that blend of the usual and the unexpected. And that's why in every generation, there's always avant-garde artists, and some people don't like them, and other people do. And then in the next generation, maybe what was avant-garde before is now the norm, and now the edge has been pushed further out, and there are new innovators. And then the really interesting thing is that if you give that cycle enough time, you'll actually get to a point where something sufficiently old now is so foreign that it feels new. So for instance, when we look back at medieval music, especially if we hear medieval music or Renaissance music even, in the kind of tuning that it would have been performed in at the time, it feels like this really edgy, interesting, new avant-garde style, because the cycle, we've moved so far past that it feels novel to us now. And that is what keeps me endlessly fascinated with music theory. So I'm really looking forward to learning more as I research and study up to make these videos. And I'm really excited for you all to join me in music theory.